I got some sweet revenge on my cheating wife and her lover, and then I just disappeared? But 5 years later, Vincent Carver wiped the sweat from his brow as he searched through the dusty attic of his suburban Chicago home. AT-38. The high school history teacher still had the energy to tackle weekend projects like cleaning out this long-neglected space. "Hey, what's this?" he said to himself, pulling out a worn leather album from behind a stack of old magazines. Vincent settled onto an old trunk, flipped open the cover, and felt a wave of nostalgia wash over him as he leafed through photos of his Irish-American family. His eyes lingered on a recent family portrait. Kelsey has grown so much, he thought, studying his 14-year-old daughter's features. But then, he felt a nagging feeling at the back of his mind. Curiosity got the better of him, and he turned to a picture of himself at the same age. He started comparing the two pictures. The differences were subtle, but undeniable. Kelsey's nose had a slight curve he lacked. Her eyes, while blue like his, had an almond shape he didn't recognize. Vincent flipped to a photo of 12-year-old Oliver. The boy's complexion was a shade darker than his own, and his hair was a richer brown. "It's probably nothing," he told himself, trying to shake off the growing unease. But as he continued to study the photos, the seed of doubt took root. Later that evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Vincent found himself hunched over his laptop in the dim light of his study. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard before he finally typed, "DNA test kits." "What are you up to, Vincent?" Margaret's voice startled him. She stood in the doorway, a curious expression on her face. Vincent quickly closed the laptop. "Oh, just looking up some stuff for class," he lied, feeling a pang of guilt. "I'm heading to bed soon." Margaret nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Don't stay up too late. Good night, love." As she walked away, Vincent reopened the laptop and ordered 3 DNA test kits. His heart raced as he hit confirm purchase, wondering what truth the results might reveal. Weeks passed, and each day was a struggle as Vincent waited for the DNA results. He found himself looking closely at his children's features at the breakfast table, searching for any resemblance to himself or Margaret. Finally, an email arrived. With trembling hands, Vincent opened the attachment. His own results showed exactly what he expected, a mix of Irish and other European ancestry, but Kelsey and Oliver's results were surprising. They showed a significant percentage of Mexican heritage. "This can't be right," Vincent whispered, staring at the screen in disbelief. That night, after tossing and turning for hours, Vincent made a decision. He'd hire a private investigator to get to the bottom of this mystery. The next day, he met with a private investigator named Frank in a plain coffee shop. "So, what exactly are we looking for here?" Frank asked, his weathered face impassive. Vincent leaned in, lowering his voice. "I need to know if my wife has been unfaithful, and if so, with whom?" Frank nodded, jotting down notes. "Any suspicions about who it might be?" Vincent shook his head. "No idea. But the kids, they might not be mine." 2 weeks later, Frank called with news. "Mr. Carver, I think you should come to my office. There's something you need to see." Vincent's heart sank as he looked at the photos spread across Frank's desk. There was Margaret, his wife of 15 years, in the arms of another man, a man with features that bore a striking resemblance to Kelsey and Oliver. "His name is William," Frank explained. "He's Margaret's boss at the construction company. They've been seeing each other for at least 15 years, even before your marriage. Vincent felt the room spin. 15 years? But we've only been married 4? Frank nodded. I'm sorry, Mr. Carver. There's more? He pushed forward a stack of papers. Love letters, emails, hotel receipts. They've been inseparable for over 15 years. As Vincent carefully examined the documents, he felt his world crumbling around him. Every loving moment, every family memory, tainted by this monumental lie. Who is he? Vincent asked, his voice barely above a whisper. William is a prominent figure in the local construction industry, Frank replied. He's known for his philanthropic work and his Mexican heritage. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Vincent stared at a photo of William, seeing echoes of Kelsey and Oliver in the man's features. My whole life, it's been a lie, Vincent murmured, more to himself than to Frank. Reeling from the revelation, Vincent knew he needed support. He decided to confide in his family, hoping for comfort and guidance. On a Sunday afternoon, he gathered his parents and siblings in the familiar warmth of his childhood home. The familiar smell of his mother's apple pie, comforting in the past, now felt strange and unfamiliar. I have something to tell you all, Vincent began, his voice quivering with emotion. He described the discovery of the photos, the DNA tests, and finally, the heartbreaking results of the private investigation. As he spoke, he noticed an odd silence falling over the room. His mother didn't look at him. His father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His sister, Nora, exchanged a pointed look with their brother, Michael. What is it? Vincent asked, his heart racing with concern. What aren't you telling me? Nora was the first to break. Vincent, we knew. The words hit him like a physical blow. You knew? What do you mean you knew? His father cleared his throat. Son, we found out about Margaret's indiscretion a few years back. We thought it would be best not to tell you. Best not to tell me? Vincent's voice rose, a mixture of disbelief and anger. You let me live a lie. You let me raise children that aren't mine, thinking they were? His mother reached out a hand. We thought we were protecting you, dear. You seemed so happy. Vincent recoiled from her touch. Happy? I was living in ignorance. How could you keep this from me? Michael spoke up, his tone defensive. We didn't want to hurt you, bro. We figured what you didn't know wouldn't hurt you. Wouldn't hurt me? Vincent laughed bitterly. Look at me now. Tell me this doesn't hurt. He stood, unable to bear the sight of his family any longer. The people he trusted most in the world had betrayed him just as deeply as Margaret had. Vincent, please, his mother pleaded. We can talk about this. We can help you through it. But Vincent was already heading for the door. I don't need your help, he spat. I don't need any of you. As he stormed out into the fading afternoon light, Vincent felt more alone than he ever had in his life. His wife, his children, even his own family, everything he'd believed in had been built on lies. In that moment of crushing isolation, a cold resolve settled over him. He couldn't trust anyone he'd once held dear. The only person he could rely on now was himself. As he drove home, his mind racing with the enormity of the betrayals he'd uncovered, Vincent made a decision. He would take matters into his own hands. He would have his revenge. The sun set on Vincent Carver's old life, and with it, the last vestiges of the trusting, naive man he'd once been. In his place rose a man hardened by betrayal, determined to reclaim control of his fate. Vincent Carver sat in his classroom, staring at the empty desks before him. The weight of his recent discoveries pressed down on his shoulders like a physical burden. He hadn't slept in weeks, his mind a constant tumult of worry over the betrayals he'd uncovered. A knock at the door jolted him from his thoughts. Principal Simmons stood in the doorway, his face serious. "Got a minute, Vincent?" he asked, though it wasn't really a question. Vincent nodded, gesturing to an empty student desk. Simmons sat, the plastic chair creaking under his weight. "I'm sorry to say this, Vincent, but the school board is pushing through a new history curriculum. It's not good." Vincent's brow furrowed. "What do you mean, not good?" Simmons sighed, pulling a folder from his briefcase. "I'll show you." As Vincent leafed through the documents, his frown deepened. The proposed changes were more than just not good. They were an attempt to whitewash historical events. "This is bullshit," Vincent muttered, then looked up, remembering who he was talking to. "Sorry, but Simmons was nodding. "You're right, it is bullshit. But the board's under pressure from some big donors. They're pushing this through whether we like it or not." Vincent felt a familiar anger rising in his chest. It was the same fury that had been simmering since he discovered the truth about his family. But this was something he could fight. "We can't let this happen," he said, his voice low and determined. Simmons raised an eyebrow. "We, Vincent? I'm sympathetic, but my hands are tied." "The board?" "Screw the board," Vincent interrupted. "These kids deserve better. They deserve the truth." For a moment, Simmons looked like he might argue, but then his shoulders slumped. "You're right, but what can we do?" Vincent stood, pacing the room. His mind, so recently clouded by personal turmoil, was suddenly crystal clear. "We organize. Teachers, parents, students, we make our voices heard." As he spoke, a plan began to form. IT was more than just opposing the curriculum changes. It was a chance to channel all his pent-up anger and frustration into something productive, something that mattered. Over the next few weeks, Vincent threw himself into the fight. He organized meetings, drafted petitions, and rallied support from every corner of the school community. One evening, as he was putting the finishing touches on a presentation for the next board meeting, Kelsey poked her head into his home office. "Dad," she said hesitantly, "can I talk to you?" Kelsey's hesitation was evident as she sat on the edge of his desk. Vincent, feeling a bit guilty, looked up. He realized he'd been so caught up in the curriculum battle that he'd barely spoken to his kids. "Of course, sweetheart. What's up?" Kelsey sat quietly, her feet swinging gently. "Is everything okay? You've been different lately." Vincent felt a surge of concern. He felt compelled to share everything. Her real father, the lies, the pain. But seeing the concern in her eyes, he hesitated. "I'm sorry, Kelsey," he said gently. "There's just a lot going on at school. But I promise everything's going to be okay." Kelsey nodded, though she didn't seem entirely convinced. "Is that why Mom's been crying at night?" The question hit him like a punch to the gut. He'd been so wrapped up in his own pain and his crusade at school, he hadn't even noticed Margaret's distress. I didn't know she was crying," he admitted. Kelsey shrugged. "She tries to hide it, but I hear her sometimes." Vincent pulled his daughter into a hug, his mind racing. He'd been neglecting his family, losing himself in this external battle. But wasn't that just another form of running away? I'll talk to her, he promised Kelsey. And I'm sorry I've been so distracted. How about we have a family game night tomorrow? Kelsey's face lit up. Really? Can we play Monopoly? Vincent laughed, the sound foreign to his own ears. Sure, kiddo. Monopoly it is. As Kelsey bounces out of the room, Vincent turns back to his computer. The fight against the curriculum changes was important, but so was his family, even if that family wasn't what he'd always believed it to be. He had to find a balance, and he had to make a decision about what to do with the truth he now carried. As weeks passed, Vincent found himself living a double life. During the day, he was the passionate teacher, rallying support against the curriculum changes. At night, he was a man consumed by thoughts of revenge. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, he sat in his study, surrounded by financial records and legal documents. His private investigator, Frank, had come through with more than just evidence of the affair. He'd uncovered financial irregularities at Williams Construction Company, potential tax fraud that could bring the whole operation crashing down. Vincent's fingers hovered over his keyboard. With just a few clicks, he could send an anonymous tip to the IRS. It would be the first domino in a chain reaction that could destroy William's life. But was that what he really wanted? A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Margaret stood in the doorway, her face a mask of concern. Vincent, can we talk? He nodded, quickly minimizing the windows on his computer screen. Margaret perched on the edge of his desk, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. I'm worried about you, she said softly. You've been so distant lately. Is it because of me? Vincent felt a surge of bitter laughter rise in his throat. If only she knew. No, he lied, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. It's just this thing with the school board. It's taking up a lot of my time. Margaret nodded, but her eyes conveyed that she didn't quite believe him. I miss you, she whispered, reaching out to touch his hand. For a moment, Vincent almost gave in, almost told her everything he knew, everything he felt. But then he remembered the photos Frank had shown him, the love letters, and 15 years of lies. He pulled his hand away. I'm sorry, he said, not meeting her eyes. I need some time. Margaret's face fell, but she nodded. As she left the room, Vincent turned back to his computer. The next day, he met with a divorce attorney. The man was known for his aggressive tactics and high success rate. So, Mr. Carver, the attorney said, leaning back in his plush leather chair, what exactly are we dealing with here? Vincent shared the whole story, including the affair, the paternity of his children, and his family's betrayal. The attorney's eyes showed his keen interest. Oh, this is good, he said, rubbing his hands together. We're going to take her for everything she's got. But Vincent shook his head. No, he said firmly. I don't want to hurt the kids. I just want justice. The attorney nodded, but Vincent could see the disappointment in his eyes. Okay, we'll do it your way, but trust me, in cases like this, it's best to go after them quickly. As Vincent left the office, he felt a mix of relief and trepidation. The wheels were in motion now, and there was no going back. Over the next few weeks, Vincent methodically put his plan into action. He carefully moved money into accounts that only he could access, and he gathered every piece of evidence Frank had found, building a strong case against Margaret and William. Then, one night when he was sure Margaret was asleep, he called the IRS. His voice shook as he explained the tax fraud at Williams' company, but he told himself he could do this. When he hung up the phone, Vincent felt a mix of emotions. He felt a rush of excitement, finally taking action after weeks of feeling stuck. But he also felt a nagging sense of emptiness, wondering if this path of revenge would truly bring him the closure he sought. He pushed those doubts aside. He'd come too far to turn back now. The night of William's company gala arrived, and Vincent found himself standing in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting his tie with trembling hands. Margaret appeared behind him, looking stunning in a shiny evening gown. "You look handsome," she said, her eyes meeting his in the mirror. Vincent smiled, trying to look happy. "Thanks. You look beautiful," he said. For a moment, he almost wavered. The woman in the mirror was the same one he'd fallen in love with all those years ago. But then he remembered the lies, the betrayal, and his resolve hardened once more. The gala was held in a fancy ballroom, with crystal chandeliers lighting up the crowd of Chicago's construction elite. Vincent watched Margaret as she walked through the room, laughing and chatting with ease. She was in her element here, the perfect corporate wife. Then he saw William, looking dapper in his tuxedo, hanging out near the bar. Vincent's fists clenched involuntarily at his sides. This was the man who had fathered his children, who had been sleeping with his wife for 15 years. As the evening wore on, Vincent waited for his moment. He made small talk, nursed a single glass of whiskey, and waited for William to take the podium. Finally, William stepped up. His voice boomed through the room, full of confidence and charm. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "I'm thrilled to announce that this has been our most successful year yet. The future of Ramirez's construction has never looked brighter." The crowd burst into applause. Vincent saw his chance. He stood, making his way towards the podium with purposeful strides. He could feel Margaret's eyes on him, and he saw confusion and alarm on her face. "Excuse me," Vincent said, his voice cutting through the applause. "I have something to add." William's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered. "Of course, Vincent. Ladies and gentlemen, Vincent Carver, husband of our lovely HR director, Margaret." Vincent took the microphone, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the moment of truth. "Thank you, William," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I just wanted to congratulate you on your success. It's truly remarkable what you've built here." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. Margaret was frozen in place, her face pale. "But I think it's time we were all honest with each other," Vincent continued, "about the true foundation of this company's success." He reached into his jacket, pulling out a folder. "I have here the results of DNA tests proving that William is the biological father of my children. I also have evidence of a 15-year affair between Mr. Ramirez and my wife, Margaret." The room went silent as everyone took in what Vincent had revealed. William's face had gone ashen, his knuckles white as he gripped the podium. "But that's not all." Vincent pressed on, his voice rising above the din. "I also have documents detailing years of tax fraud and embezzlement at Ramirez Construction. These documents are currently with the IRS and the FBI." The room went into a frenzy. Board members jumped to their feet, shouting questions. Investors rushed towards the exits. In the center of it all stood William and Margaret, their carefully constructed world crumbling around them. Vincent watched as the company owner, his face purple with rage, stormed up to William. "You're fired," he bellowed. "And you can bet your ass you'll be cooperating fully with any investigation." Margaret stumbled towards Vincent, tears streaming down her face. "Vincent," she pleaded, "how could you do this?" Vincent looked at her, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. "How could I?" he asked quietly. "How could you, Margaret? 15 years of lies. Our entire marriage, it was all a sham." As security cleared the room, Vincent turned and walked away, his heart heavy with sadness. He could hear Margaret's sobs and William's attempts to calm the furious board members behind him, but he didn't look back. Outside, the cool night air hit him like a slap in the face. He loosened his tie and took deep breaths, trying to calm himself. It was done. His revenge was complete. Yet, as he stood there, gazing at the chaos spreading across the ballroom's windows, Vincent felt no joy or triumph. Instead, a deep, empty space where his anger had once burned. He hailed a cab, gave the driver his home address, and as the city lights blurred past, Vincent pondered his next steps. He had torn down the lie that was his life. Now, he had to figure out how to build something true from the rubble. The morning after the gala, Vincent Carver woke to a world forever changed. The taste of victory was bitter in his mouth, mixed with the acrid flavor of spent anger and lingering betrayal. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the hollowness in his chest would ever be filled again. His phone buzzed incessantly. News of last night's confrontation had spread like wildfire through Chicago's business and social circles. He didn't pay any attention to the calls and messages, though, because he was busy planning his revenge. 89 a.m., Vincent went into the offices of Hartley and Associates, a law firm with a very tough divorce attorney. Bernard Hartley was known for being very successful and for making his opponents suffered. Hartley's office showed how successful he was. It was made of mahogany and leather, and it had a beautiful view of Lake Michigan. The lawyer himself was a bit of an enigma. He wore an expensive suit, but his hair was cut quite simply. His eyes showed that he was a very determined person. "Mr. Carver," Hartley said, standing up to shake Vincent's hand, "I heard about last night's performance. Quite the show, I must say." Vincent nodded, taking a seat. "I want this done quickly and cleanly, Mr. Hartley. I have all the evidence you'll need right here." He placed a thick folder on the desk. Hartley's eyes gleamed as he leafed through the documents. "Oh, this is good. Very good indeed. With this, we can't—" "No," Vincent interrupted. "I don't want to destroy her completely. I just want what's fair. And I want the kids." Hartley's excitement dimmed slightly, but he nodded. "Of course, Mr. Carver. We'll proceed as you wish." Over the next few weeks, Vincent's life became a whirlwind of legal meetings and court appearances. Margaret, backed into a corner by the mountain of evidence against her, put up a fight. Her once immaculate appearance had given way to dark circles under her eyes and a permanent look of defeat. The judge's decision came quickly and was clear. Vincent would get full custody of Kelsey and Oliver, as well as most of their money and belongings. Margaret got a small alimony payment and the right to visit them, but it felt more like a consolation prize than a real victory. As Vincent left the courthouse, he saw Margaret sitting on a bench, her head down, looking sad. For a moment, he felt a bit of sympathy, regret, but then he remembered the years of lies, the betrayal that had hollowed out his life, and he walked on without a backward glance. Meanwhile, across town, William was facing his own personal hell. The IRS investigation, triggered by Vincent's anonymous tip, had uncovered years of tax fraud and embezzlement. William's once sterling reputation in the construction industry was in tatters. William was desperate to recoup his losses and maintain his lavish lifestyle, so he turned to the only avenue he thought might save him. Gambling. He started small, placing bets at legitimate casinos, but as his losses mounted and his desperation grew, he found himself drawn into the seedy underbelly of Chicago's illegal gambling scene. One night, in a smoke-filled back room of a rundown bar, William sat at a poker table, sweat beading on his brow. He was down to his last chip, having already lost his savings, his home, and any chance of rebuilding his reputation in the industry. "All in," he rasped, pushing the lone chip forward. The dealer, a man with dead eyes and nicotine-stained fingers, dealt the final card. William's hand shook as he turned over his cards. "House wins," the dealer intoned, his voice devoid of emotion. William stumbled from the table, his world spinning. He had it all, but in a few short months, he had gone from being one of Chicago's most respected businessmen to a penniless gambler with a huge debt. He stumbled out into the cold Chicago night. William realized that his carefully constructed life, built on lies and deceit, had crumbled to dust, and somewhere across the city, Vincent Carver slept soundly for the first time in months, his revenge complete. The "for sale" sign stood stark against the manicured lawn of the Carver family home. Vincent watched from the driveway as the realtor hammered it into place, each strike of the mallet another nail in the coffin of his old life. "Dad," Kelsey's voice pulled him from his reverie. "Are we really leaving?" Vincent turned to his daughter, seeing the mix of uncertainty and hope in her eyes. At 14, Kelsey was old enough to understand the big picture of what had happened, even if she didn't know all the little details. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said, giving her a hug. "It's time for a fresh start." Oliver ran out of the house, his 12-year-old energy still going strong, even though the last few months had been tough. "I'll take the driver's seat on the moving truck," he yelled, racing past them towards the driveway. Vincent couldn't help but smile, despite everything. The lies, the betrayal, the public spectacle of the divorce. His kids had shown a resilience that continually amazed him. They'd chosen to stay with him, recognizing his unwavering love and support even in the face of the shocking revelation about their biological father. The move to a new town was more than just a change of scenery. It was a chance to rebuild, to create a life unburdened by the weight of past deceptions. Vincent had accepted a position as principal at Oak Ridge Academy, a prestigious private school known for its progressive approach to teaching history. As they pulled out of the driveway for the last time, Vincent caught a glimpse of his neighbors peering out from behind their curtains. They were probably glad to see the Carvers go, tired of the whispers and scandal that had plagued the once quiet suburban street. The drive to their new home was filled with a mix of excited chatter from the kids and long stretches of contemplative silence. Vincent's mind wandered to the curriculum debate that had consumed him in the midst of his personal turmoil. His victory in that fight had earned him widespread respect in educational circles, opening doors he never thought possible. As they crossed the state line, leaving the familiar skyline of Chicago behind, Vincent felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The anger that had fueled him for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious optimism for the future. Their new home was smaller than the old one, but it felt brighter somehow. Large windows let in streams of sunlight, illuminating rooms that seemed to hold the promise of new beginnings. As Kelsey and Oliver raced through the house, claiming bedrooms and arguing over closet space, Vincent stood in the empty living room, taking it all in. The first few weeks in their new town were a whirlwind of unpacking, school preparations, and community introductions. Vincent threw himself into his new role at Oak Ridge Academy, determined to make a positive impact on his students' lives. It was during this time that Vincent realized he needed to do more than just move on. He really needed to heal, because the betrayal he'd experienced had left deep scars, ones that wouldn't fade without conscious effort. So, on a whim, he decided to start a support group for people who had been betrayed by their spouses. The first meeting was held in a small room at the local community center, with just 3 attendees besides himself. "My name is Vincent," he began, his voice slightly shaky. "I'm here because my wife of 15 years had an affair with her boss. It resulted in 2 children I thought were mine." As he spoke, Vincent felt a weight lift from his chest. The simple act of sharing his story, of speaking his truth to others who understood, was cathartic in a way he hadn't anticipated. Week by week, the group grew. People from all walks of life, united by the common thread of betrayal, found solace and strength in each other's stories. Vincent discovered a sense of purpose in helping others navigate the turbulent waters of broken trust and shattered relationships. It was at one of these meetings that Vincent first met Alexandra. She sat quietly at the back of the room, her dark hair framing a face that spoke of both strength and vulnerability. When she finally spoke, her story of betrayal and resilience touched Vincent deeply. After the meeting, they found themselves lingering, conversation flowing easily between them. Alexandra, it turned out, was also an educator, a history teacher at a nearby high school. "I've heard great things about what you're doing at Oak Ridge," she said, a spark of admiration in her eyes. "Your approach to teaching history is inspiring." Vincent felt a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. "Thank you," he said, truly meaning it. "It's been a challenge, but a rewarding one." As the weeks turned to months, Vincent and Alexandra's friendship deepened. They challenged each other intellectually, sharing ideas about education and life. She inspired him to push boundaries, to think beyond conventional teaching methods. One evening, after a deep conversation about the role of education and social justice, Vincent felt something change inside. The emptiness he'd felt for so long was now filled with a new, hopeful feeling. He looked at Alexandra, and she looked back at him, sharing the same realization. Little by little, they moved closer to each other, their first kiss being gentle and uncertain, a promise of something true and genuine. As they pulled apart, Vincent felt a mix of excitement and fear. "I'm not sure I'm ready for this," he admitted, feeling a bit nervous. Alexandra squeezed his hand. "That's okay," she said softly. "We've got time." And for the first time in years, Vincent Carver looked to the future with genuine hope. 5 years passed in a blur of school events, family dinners, and quiet evenings with Alexandra. Vincent's life had settled into a rhythm he never thought possible after his divorce. Kelsey, now 19, was thriving in her first year of college, and Oliver, 17, was captain of his high school debate team. His quick wit and passion for justice were a constant source of pride for Vincent. It was a crisp autumn morning when the call came. Vincent was in his office at Oak Ridge Academy, reviewing applications for a new history teacher position, when his phone buzzed. The number wasn't one he recognized, but something compelled him to answer. "Hello? Vincent? It's Rebecca, Margaret's sister." Vincent felt his stomach drop. He hadn't heard from anyone in Margaret's family since the divorce. Rebecca? What's wrong? There was a pause, filled with the static of unsaid words. Then, it's Margaret. She's gone. Vincent. She passed away last night. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Vincent gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles turning white. What happened? It was her heart, Rebecca's voice cracked. An undiagnosed condition. She went in her sleep. As Rebecca continued to explain the funeral arrangements and legal matters, Vincent felt a bit disconnected. He wasn't feeling the joy he expected to feel at Margaret's passing, but he also wasn't feeling the sorrow he might have anticipated. It was as if he was hearing about a distant friend, not the woman he'd promised to love for the rest of his life. But it was Rebecca's next words that truly took him by surprise. "Vincent, there's something else you should know," she said, her voice heavy with a mix of guilt and sadness. "Margaret, she's been struggling these past few years. After the divorce, after everything that happened with William, she couldn't find work in her field. The scandal, you know?" Vincent listened in stunned silence as Rebecca painted a picture of Margaret's final years. She couldn't find work in human resources or anywhere else, so she ended up working as a janitor at a local community college. She was living in a small, run-down apartment, barely making ends meet. And William? Vincent found himself asking, though he wasn't sure why he cared. Rebecca's bitter laugh crackled through the phone. "That bastard fled to Mexico about a year ago. I heard he was gambling away his money, leaving Margaret to take care of herself." As the call ended, Vincent sat in his office, feeling the silence press in around him. The life he'd built over the past 5 years felt fragile, as if the ghosts of his past could reach out and shatter it at any moment. That evening, he gathered Kelsey and Oliver in the living room. Alexandra sat nearby, a silent pillar of support. "Kids," Vincent began, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his heart. "I have some news about your mother." He watched their faces carefully as he relayed the information, ready to offer comfort or explanations as needed. But his children, now young adults, received the news with a maturity that both surprised and saddened him. "Do you think we should go to the funeral?" Kelsey asked, her voice small. Vincent looked at his daughter, seeing echoes of Margaret in her features. "I think that's something we need to decide together," he said gently. "It's okay if you want to go. It's also okay if you don't." After a long discussion, filled with tears and moments of quiet reflection, they decided as a family to attend the funeral. Not out of obligation, Vincent realized, but as an act of closure. It was the final chapter in a story that had shaped all their lives. The day of the funeral dawned gray and cool. Vincent stood between Kelsey and Oliver at the graveside, their hands clasped tightly in his. As the priest intoned the final prayers, Vincent found his mind wandering, reflecting on the twisted path that had led him to this moment. His revenge had brought a kind of justice, yes, but standing here, watching his children say goodbye to a mother they barely knew, he realized it hadn't brought him happiness. That had come later, through his resilience, his focus on his children, and his dedication to his principles. As they turned to leave the cemetery, Vincent squeezed his children's hands. He looked at them, really looked at them, and felt a surge of gratitude for the authentic life they now shared. A life free from lies and betrayal, built on a foundation of honesty and unconditional love. They walked towards the parking lot, where Alexandra waited by the car. Her presence was a reminder of the new chapter in their lives, one built on trust, integrity, and the unbreakable bonds of chosen family. As they drove away from the cemetery, leaving behind the last physical tie to their old life, Vincent felt a sense of peace settle over him. The road ahead was uncertain, but he was no longer afraid of the journey because he had his children, he had Alexandra, and he had a life built on truth. The ghosts of the past would always be there, lingering in the shadows of memory, but they no longer held power over him. Vincent Carver had faced his demons, weathered the storm of betrayal, and emerged stronger on the other side. As the car turned onto the highway, heading home, Vincent looked in the rearview mirror at Kelsey and Oliver. They were engrossed in quiet conversation, their heads bent together. In that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that despite all the pain and heartache, he wouldn't change a thing. It was through these challenges that they had formed this new family, not by blood or false promises, but by choice, by love, and by an unwavering commitment to honesty. The future stretched out before them like a blank canvas, ready to be painted with new memories, new triumphs, and new love. For the first time in a long time, Vincent Carver felt truly, deeply happy. This is where our story comes to an end. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed it, I'd be thrilled if you subscribe to this channel. Just click on the video you see on the screen, and I'll see you there.